Li Qiang just became the number 2 guy in the CCP, but the question I have is that good or is that bad for Alibaba shareholders? And so while you guys smash that like button, let me run the intro. What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. And this one's an interesting one because there has been a shakeup at the CCP, as you guys are well aware, and a lot of the Western media has insinuated that China has become more authoritarian. But the question is, I think we have to do our own dive to see if that isn't the case. Now, here's the problem with Chinese politics in general. It's really hard to really understand what's happening with the inner workings of the CCP party, but we can do the best with what we have. And so if you guys are unfamiliar with Li Qiang, here's actually a photo of him. He was in the Wall Street Journal. Now, here's the thing. Li Qiang's record does suggest that he could serve as a moderating influence on Xi Jinping, but he's also fallen in line when it matters. And here's what they mean by that. So you can see here that Xi Jinping's new right-hand man has shown two sides to his personality over his career. And let me make that a bit bigger so you can see that he is a pro-business pragmatist and he's unafraid to push the boundaries of Communist Party rule. But here's the problem. He's also seen as a loyalist who will implement Beijing's policies effectively and aggressively when needed. So it looks like he's a bit of both. And my question is, which side will prevail? And here's the thing. He's actually very close with Jack Ma. And he's one of the few senior officials that supported using Western developed mRNA vaccines in China. And so when it comes to Alibaba shareholders or just Western investors in the Chinese economy as a whole, we kind of want a guy who has that type of approach that is in the ear of the most powerful guy in China. So far, based on what the Wall Street Journal is suggesting, it seems like this is a good thing for us, not a bad thing. And so they go on to say, there was a person here quoted, I can't pronounce his name, but he's the president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. He says Mr. Li Qiang has good initiatives and good instincts about what should be done, but again and again, he's proven to be extremely loyal and ended up not following his own instincts. So that's a bit of a challenge. And so here's the most important thing that I think should scare us a little bit. Foreign businesses must get ready for policies geared not towards the economy, but towards stability and control, as well as wealth distribution and greater equality. And so what that rings to me is that common prosperity push. And you guys might remember at their sort of like major CCP meeting that they recently had, they did reinvigorate the push for common prosperity. And so the question is, what exactly does that mean? And does that impact our investments? And does that impact investors? And so I'm not really sure how to think about it. In fact, nobody's really sure how to think about how common prosperity is going to be rolled out in the country. If you guys have an opinion on that, let me know in the comments below. I'm always learning from you guys. Now, Bloomberg actually did an article where they started talking about that. And so what they're effectively saying is that China's common prosperity's drive has morphed into common poverty. I wouldn't go that far, but you know, they are saying that governments across the globe have discovered that trying to narrow the wealth gap is actually an impossible task. And I'm saying, and I wrote it in the right here, is that investors are worried that cracking down on the wealthy could reduce capital investment in China and drive down progress. And so I haven't seen evidence of that yet. And I do eagerly await to see what exactly they mean by common prosperity. The last time it was brought up, it just meant development capex in the guise of common prosperity by companies like Alibaba. And so it was a bit of sort of like a weak initiative. It really just turned into, like I just said, the companies pushing out their capex spend that they would have pushed out anyways, but they just called it common prosperity and a donation. It was never a donation when you actually looked into it. And we covered that on this channel, and that's why I became more bullish on Alibaba at that time, because it didn't look like wealth was being taken away from shareholders, and it ended up proving to be true. And now this part of the Wall Street Journal article really sort of like speaks to the type of person that Li Qiang is. Notice that when COVID started flaring up in China earlier in 2022, President Xi Jinping insisted on a zero-tolerance approach. However, Li Qiang adopted a lighter touch in Shanghai, initially trying targeted lockdowns while keeping as much of the city open as possible and minimizing economic disruptions. And so he also consulted with medical experts, scientists, and international companies. And so what does that tell you? That tells you that somebody on the inside is approaching this the way that we would have wanted it to be approached. And it even goes further. Take a look. He and his government actually helped many companies with operations in the area, including Tesla, to restart production and, avoid sort of like the harsh lockdowns by introducing closed loop systems in which workers slept in factories to avoid contact with the virus outside. Now, I understand that a lot of you, as soon as you read closed loop systems, you're going to be like, okay, well, they're just being forced to live and work in the same place. I get it. But when the mandate is what the mandate is, you need a guy who will be able to at least work within it. I mean, it wasn't the best solution, but at least it was a solution for the companies to continue to operate. And here's what I really like about him. Notice here that Mr. Li actually spoke to medical professionals and company executives about mRNA technology and backed efforts by a German drug maker to get Beijing's approval for its vaccine to be used in China. And, in December of 2020, they actually reached a deal, but I'm not really sure why that deal broke. The whole point was to deliver 100 million doses to China in 2021. It's been a couple of years since then now. We're going into 2023. And so nobody really knows why it was halted by the central government, and of course BioNTech declined to comment on it. And so I don't really know why that deal was stopped, but it's very clear that Mr. Li was actually pushing this forward. And so once again, if he got his way, we would have been far and past from this issue, and I don't think we would have had the 2022 declines that we have. And it doesn't stop there. He actually is very business focused, and this is what I mean. This is actually a quote by him. He says that the private economy is a dynamic economy and an economy that enriches the people. And, that was a quote by that he was quoted saying by the local media. And Mr. Jack Ma, the former or the founder of Alibaba and the former CEO of Alibaba, was one of his favorite people to actually speak to. So that tells you that he probably should be on the side of companies like Alibaba prospering. And I've said for a long time that it's a black eye on China if a company as large and as important to the country as Alibaba fails. I would say Alibaba is as important to the success of China as a company like Microsoft is to the US. In fact, I would think Alibaba is more important to China than Microsoft would be to the US. And while he was working in Shanghai, notice here that he oversaw foreign investment from companies such as Tesla, which spent $2 billion building a factory there, which was its first outside of the US. And notice here that Tesla was actually allowed to become a sole owner of its Shanghai factory, while all other foreign automakers are required to build joint ventures with local Chinese companies. And so notice that many people in the business community actually see Mr. Li Qiang as a relatively liberal party member who prefers discussing commercial deals to politics. And so once again, that is really good for us, and it shows that he's focused on commerce. He's not necessarily focused on, communism or what people think that he would be focused on, as the Western media has been sort of reporting that the country's getting more authoritarian in this environment. And it's fun to speculate, and I actually think, just if I'm going to try and speculate a little bit, you guys are already familiar with this article where the US and China have been moving to sort of mend relationships and be on better footings. And I wonder if this is Li Qiang's influence over President Xi Jinping. And so you would recall that in late October, President Xi Jinping said China is willing to work with the United States to find ways to get along to benefit both. And, since that CCP party meeting and since Li Qiang took his position of power, we're already seeing China, try to mend relationships with the US, albeit there are still, conflicts as it relates to Taiwan, but they're working together at least. The dialogue's open. That's more than what I could have asked for, at least this early on in the new sort of like administration, even though it's the same administration as the last one for China. And I know that this might partially just be a result of the protests, but we are seeing the Chinese government, the CCP, back away from its zero COVID approach, or at least the rigidity of the zero COVID approach. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I want to know what you guys think. Is Li Qiang good, or is he bad for the Chinese economy? And if you don't have a position, no problem. Just drop a meow in that chat to help with the algorithm. Now, if you guys haven't seen my latest video on Alphabet, take a look at it, because they just announced layoffs and I do a complete analysis of the company. I actually think that it might be worth allocating a couple of dollars for. Now, that's not a recommendation for you at all, but it's worth looking at the valuation and the opportunity that exists there. And so if you want to get access to that video, click right here.